What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there today, where we headed into week 17 and talk about the running backs we're going to start and sit in our fantasy championships for so many leagues. Now, I love scrolling through the comment section on videos and seeing all the stories of people who are playing for championship trophies or just barely missed it, even if they've just started playing fantasy football. Love to see those stories, so make sure you leave them down below in the comment section, but we're not going to waste a whole lot of time. There's a lot on the line here for a lot of good matchups this weekend. So let's kick it off with Thursday Night Football. Let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys and Tennessee Titans. Now we'll start off right here with the Dallas Cowboys, talking about Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard. Now the Dallas Cowboys have already clinched their playoff spot, but they're playing for a higher seed this week. Now, coming off a high-scoring win against the Philadelphia Eagles, it was another game in which Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard put together another double-digit fantasy performance. Zeke now has a touchdown in 8 straight ball games. Pollard, not as consistent when it comes to scoring touchdowns here as of late, but he does have that big playability that we haven't really seen from Zeke very often. The issue here, as of late, if any, in back-to-back games, Tony Pollard hasn't even averaged more than 4 yards per carry, which is not what we're used to seeing with Tony Pollard. He's not a guy who's going to get huge volume. We rely on the efficiency and the big plays, but now they're going against Tennessee. And Tennessee only allows 16.1 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, third fewest in the league. They have only allowed a team to run for over 100 yards 3 times all season, and 2 of those games were in weeks 1 and 2. So for the majority of this season, this has been a great run defense in Tennessee. Now, Tony Pollard himself also dealing with a minor thigh injury. Jerry Jones has already come out and said he should be good to go, but he's still not practicing for a Thursday game. So there is a little bit of concern there. But I don't love Thursday games. I don't know of anybody that loves Thursday football. Not so much not being able to watch it, but the production that we see on Thursdays, it's just not great. Then you add in the fact of a difficult matchup going up against Tennessee that I don't love. It's on the road, but the consistency and the usage stays there for both of these guys. As of right now, I feel slightly safer with Zeke until we get more information on the Pollard injury. If he's going to be limited, obviously we kind of have to look at that a little bit differently, and maybe there's a situation where we have to sit Tony Pollard and maybe boost up Zeke just a little bit. But as of right now, until we get more information, both of these guys have basically been starts for like 2 straight months now. Their opponent, another guy. You already know you're going to start Derrick Henry in your fantasy football playoffs, in your fantasy football championship. We know what Henry is. We know we start him. He now has over 100 yards rushing and a touchdown in 3 straight ball games. Got to expect huge volume once again that we know we'll have Malik Willis under center. And Tennessee has to keep trying to win ball games to get into the playoffs, which is crazy to even think about since they've lost 5 straight. Now, Dallas, no easy pushover for Derrick Henry either. They allow 16.1 fantasy points per game, 4th fewest in the NFL. I'm not going to sugarcoat it here, though. This offensive line dealing with a lot of injuries, and Henry himself is even questionable to play with a hip injury this week. But I have to think that's just a little bit more of some rest for the King, because they know they're going to rely on him heavily on Thursday. I don't expect him to miss this ball game. Now, we know there's no Ryan Tannehill. Other teams know that as well. If I know that, I'm sure other NFL teams know that, which means other teams are preparing for Derrick Henry and really nothing else. Malik Willis, not a high-volume passing quarterback. Opposing teams know they're going to run the ball with Derrick Henry, but they've known that for years, and they still haven't been able to stop this guy. So we obviously start Derrick Henry. How about, well, you know what? We have no Saturday football, which means we're diving right over to Sunday, and why not? How about an extended hip thrust into Sunday football, into Championship Sunday for so many people? And let's talk about the Arizona Cardinals and Atlanta Falcons, starting off with Arizona and James Conner, who's currently up to running back 17 overall on the season. A late season push by James Conner that has helped a lot of people not only get into the playoffs, but win some playoff matchups. He now has a touchdown in 6 straight games, has had at least 19 touches in 4 straight, and has seen 5+ targets in 4 of his last 5 ball games played. And once again, this week, James Conner is going to be the focal point of this offense. We do not know whether or not we're going to have Colt McCoy or Trace McSorley, but what we do know is regardless of who plays quarterback, we're going to see a lot of James Conner going up against the Atlanta Falcons, who are allowing over 20 fantasy points per game. They have allowed over 130 yards rushing to teams in 6 straight ball games. This team right now in Arizona is absolutely, I don't even know if crushed is the right word. They are decimated with injuries. The offensive line, most of the defense. Colt McCoy, like I mentioned, still questionable to play. But luckily, the Falcons aren't some offensive juggernaut either. This game could stay close, which means we see more James Conner and definitely makes him a start here once again. And then on the other side of the football, we got Cordarrelle Patterson and Tyler Allgeier. But I have a question for you. Anybody who's watched the Falcons games over the last couple weeks, is it just me, or does Tyler Allgeier all of a sudden just look like the switch has flipped, right? It seems like the game has slowed down. He's become a lot more comfortable, a lot more confident in his game, and has really taken over this backfield here in the last couple of weeks. Now has 18+ touches in back-to-back games, just had a season high in targets with 5. He had only had 11 targets all year prior to last week, in which he saw 5. That is a huge jump for a running back. Now he's going against Arizona. They allow over 23.5 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, 6th most in the league. The offensive line still not 100%, but at this point, Cordarrelle Patterson is just kind of like an afterthought in this offense. Tyler Allgeier has been the guy the last few weeks, and I really don't see why they won't ride him once again. In a matchup between two quarterbacks who aren't really leading prolific passing offenses, I expect a lot of running in this game. Tyler Allgeier being the main beneficiary of that in Atlanta. I like what I've seen as of late. I love the confidence in Tyler Allgeier. He did not have that a few weeks ago. It just really seems like as of late, he is comfortable in his ball game. He knows where he needs to be. He's hitting the right holes, and he's making things happen. I have no issue starting Tyler Allgeier. He's not going to be crazy high in my rankings, but as a flex play, for sure, in week 17. Which will then take us down to Chicago and Detroit. And full disclosure, this matchup right here from a running back perspective absolutely terrifies me. We'll start off with Chicago and David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert. I just have a lot of concerns with the return of Khalil Herbert. Now, he did not look great last week, and they didn't really give him a whole lot of touches. But what does that mean going forward? We expected them to bring him along slowly. But what this does tell us that he's going to be involved and he's going to take a few touches a game away from David Montgomery. It's not like either one of these guys are a lock for 10 fantasy points per contest, but we've seen them in this matchup before. Back in week 10. Now, in that game, Detroit only allowed the Bears running backs to run for 94 total yards. They allowed Justin Fields to run for 147. Now, when it comes to the season totals, the Lions are allowing just over 19 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. But what the hell happened last week when they faced off against the Carolina Panthers and got absolutely just mushroom stamped, right? They gave up 320 yards rushing to Carolina last week. They hadn't allowed over 100 yards rushing to a team in 4 of their last 5 games prior to last week. This run defense was playing great. And then all of a sudden, they crapped the bed last week. The offensive line's still banged up, and we have multiple wide receivers that are hurt. And the likes of Chase Claypool, Equanimeous St. Brown, multiple offensive linemen banged up as well. But I'm pretty sure that Dan Campbell talked to his defense after that game. And that's what really worries me about this matchup for the running backs of the Chicago Bears. We're back at home in Detroit for the Lions, and I'm sure they just got reamed by their head coach because technically they're not disqualified from the playoffs just yet. Their chances are super slim, but they have to win. Do I really want to tempt fate with the running backs of Chicago, who are going to be in a split in which their quarterback could find more success on the ground than them? I don't feel like this is a safe start one way or another. If I had to choose one, still, it would be David Montgomery, but I have my concerns. A lot of the same can be said for Detroit. I just don't feel safe about this backfield either. What the hell happened to the backfield of the Detroit Lions? Neither DeAndre Swift or Jamaal Williams have cracked 10 fantasy points in a game in 3 straight weeks. The overall volume is decreasing. Jamaal Williams hasn't played over 26 snaps in a game over the last month, and we just saw DeAndre Swift last weekend go out and only get 5 total touches. Now, Chicago, they allow over 24 fantasy points per game to running backs. This is a great matchup for opposing running backs. And the reports are out there saying that right now, Jamaal Williams suffered an injury to his left leg in the second half of that game against Carolina and is questionable to play. If for whatever reason Jamaal Williams is ruled out, then of course I have to bump up DeAndre Swift into the start category. But as of right now, I don't have that warm fuzzy. Jamaal Williams, one of the emotional leaders of this team, I have a feeling he's probably going to be out there for this ball game, and I want to start one of these guys. But if they're both active, I don't know how you can pick and choose between the two, especially since Justin Jackson is also sprinkled in from time to time and is taking away touchdowns from the upside of these guys. As of right now, due to the injury of Jamaal Williams and the lack of consistent volume going the way of DeAndre Swift, I have them both as a sit until we get more information. Be sure to watch throughout the week, not only the ranking show, but the live stream as well on Friday night so we can kind of get some updated information on this backfield. How about we go down to Jacksonville and Houston and Travis Etienne? This was great timing for Etienne to go out there and face the Houston Texans in the fantasy championship week for so many people. Now, he faced Houston back in week 5, had 114 total yards and 12.5 fantasy points in that game, but that was still when James Robinson was on the roster, and in that game, he stole 12 touches away from Travis Etienne. Now, since Travis Etienne suffered a midseason minor injury, he's all of a sudden getting back to big volume once again. Has had at least 17 touches now in 3 straight ball games, 100 plus total yards in back-to-back games, and they came against Dallas and the New York Jets. Tough matchups. Now he gets Houston. They allow 27.7 fantasy points per game, the most in the NFL to the position. But I don't want to sit back and act like the injury to Cam Robinson doesn't affect this offensive line. Of course it does. It was a huge loss for the Jaguars. But I'll be damned that the Jags right now have a chance at the playoffs, and they're going up against Houston, a team that has nothing to play for, an inferior opponent. I love Travis Etienne this week. His opponents, no way in hell do we even consider either one of these guys during your fantasy championship round. I wouldn't consider them week 3 of the season, much less week 17. We just saw Royce Freeman go out, have 17 touches last week, and didn't even score 5 fantasy points. Hell no. You ain't getting in my fantasy roster. Let's talk about the Denver Broncos and Kansas City Chiefs and Latavius Murray first. Now, no more Nathaniel Hackett. That can't be a bad thing, right? The play calling was horrendous, but this team looks defeated and hasn't shown up in what feels like the entire season. I have to think that Kansas City gets a lead in this ballgame, and we really can't rely on the running game of Denver if they're falling behind early. This offensive line is still destroyed. Russ is out there focused on danger witch sandwiches and everything else other than what's happening on the field. I'm not going to tempt it with this risk this week either. His opponent, though, Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon. Now, as of right now, a ton of people have Jerick McKinnon to thank for their late season fantasy playoff push. Touchdowns in 4 straight ball games, including the game they played against Denver just a couple of weeks ago. In that game, Jerick McKinnon had 134 total yards and 2 touchdowns. Isaiah Pacheco had 93 total yards and no touchdowns in that ball game. And that was a game that they played on the road in Denver. Denver is allowing right now 20.8 fantasy points per contest to opposing running backs, and they just got worked by Cam Akers and the Los Angeles Rams. The Chiefs are starting to get healthy at the right time. One concern that I do have here, the return of Mecole Hardman. Does the return of Hardman mean we see less of a ceiling for one Jerick McKinnon, who has kind of filled in a little bit of that short passing game role? That's just something to keep in the back of your mind. At this point, the floor is safer with Isaiah Pacheco. The ceiling is higher with Jerick McKinnon. In a matchup in which I think the Chiefs can dominate, I have no issues starting both running backs of the Chiefs. If you're chasing points, you got to go McKinnon. If you just need yourself a safe flex play, Isaiah Pacheco is that safer guy, but just a limited ceiling. He's not getting an opportunity at very many touchdowns. Once they get down inside the red zone, we're seeing more Jerick McKinnon as of right now, but the Chiefs have clinched a playoff spot, still fighting for that number 1 overall spot though, so they still have something a little bit to play for. How about we go down to Miami and New England now, a great end of season battle that we've seen for years between these two teams. We'll start off in Miami. You got Raheem, not quite a must-start Mostert, and Jeff Wilson Jr. And we're back to the headache that is the Dolphins' backfield. This is a must-win game for Miami. I mean, they have no choice but to win this ball game if they want to have a chance at the playoffs, and it sounds like they may have to do it with Teddy B under center, Tua put back into concussion protocol, and now we have a split backfield with a backup quarterback. Now, both these guys had 10 touches in the game just last week, and we know that the passing game between them is going to be a little sporadic at times. The running backs weren't overly relied upon when we saw Tua go down earlier in the season and Teddy Bridgewater as the starter. Now, New England, it's a tough matchup as well. They only allow 16 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. And with Tua now in the concussion protocol for what looks like his 3rd concussion of the year, which I absolutely hate to hear for Tua. Plus we have offensive tackle Eric Fisher questionable to play. And there's a chance of rain in this ballgame. Things are just going against this backfield right now, and I have to think that they would run more, but Teddy Bridgewater is a capable quarterback that can still utilize the skill set of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle deeper down the field, so I don't have that warm fuzzy about either one of the guys in Miami. If I had to choose one this week, I roll the dice on Jeff Wilson, but honestly, it's a 50-50 chance here in that backfield. Not one clear guy that is the safer start. How about their opponent, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots? And 2 of the last 3 games from Ramondre have kind of killed fantasy owners. Now, don't forget that he left to an injury 3 weeks ago against the Arizona Cardinals, and then just this last week, 33 total yards on 15 touches against Cincinnati. Not ideal at a very important time of the season, but there is no way we can sit this guy in this matchup. So much has changed since they faced each other way back in week 1. Miami right now allows over 21 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's 10th most in the league. We got Devontae Parker still banged up. Damian Harris still questionable. Both tight ends and Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith questionable and banged up as well. The Patriots are technically still in the playoff hunt, but this is also a must-win game for them as well. It's a home game, and New England has to make sure they're focused on controlling time of possession. I don't care that Tua's not under center in Miami. Teddy Bridgewater and this offense can still put up points quickly with the talent that they have on that offense. They need to keep the ball away from Miami. How do you do that? You control time of possession on the ground, and we start Ramondre Stevenson. What about the Indianapolis Colts and New York Giants now? We'll start off with Zach Moss and Deion Jackson. I'm sure everyone is still clamoring out there to start Zach Moss again, right, because of what he did 2 weeks ago. And then he had, 12 carries for 65 yards in a game last week. This team is an absolute shambles and just looks to be tanking, if I'm being completely honest. And they've already announced that Nick Foles is going to remain their starting quarterback. But what I saw from Nick Foles last week was not good. I think I could throw the ball quicker. It seemed like all of his throws were in slow motion. I feel like I probably could have intercepted a few of those passes. The quarterback play just horrendous in Indianapolis, and it's not doing any favors for the running game as well, because now defenses are just creeping into the box. They're going up against the Giants, who allow the 12th most points to opposing running backs at 21 per game. There's not a lot of injuries of concern here that are affecting Zach Moss and Deion Jackson, but this is a must-win game for the Giants against a team that's tanking in the Indianapolis Colts. Not a running game I'm overly interested in championship weekend, so I'm sitting both of these guys. Their opponent, Saquon Barkley, We still for sure start Saquon Barkley though, right? Touchdowns in 4 of his last 5 ball games, but what I love to see the most is his 18 targets over the last 2. He hadn't had 8+ targets in a game all year until this past weekend. I love to see the passing work return to Saquon Barkley because it's really keeping him involved no matter what the game script is. If it's a close game, he can run it. If they're behind, they're going to throw it to him. It makes his floor super safe, and now he's going against the Colts, who allow over 23 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, 5th most in the league. Sounds like a dream matchup for Saquon Barkley. Now, the offensive line, not 100%, but this is a home game and a win-and-in scenario for the playoffs. You know the Giants are going to go out there, give the ball to their playmakers, and try to find a way to walk away with a win and get in to the playoffs. Saquon Barkley is their best chance at that. You got to think he gets heavy volume this weekend. He's going to be a start. What about the New Orleans Saints and Philadelphia Eagles? We'll start off with Alvin Kamara. And finally, we've had back-to-back solid games for Alvin Kamara, but they were against Atlanta and Cleveland. So this matchup is going to be a little bit more difficult here, I have to think, this weekend. We need this game to stay close so we can continue to use Alvin Kamara because the pass work is just not there for whatever reason. In every year of his career so far, in which he's played at least 14 games, he's had at least 97 targets. He's only at 74 right now with 2 games to play, so I don't think he reaches that number, and we see a career low from Alvin Kamara. Now on the year, Philadelphia allows 20.6 fantasy points per game, but we just saw Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard creep into the double-digit fantasy points just last weekend. Chris Olave is still questionable. Jarvis Landry is done. Guard Andrews Pete, questionable to play. That's a loss for the offensive line for sure. But when Kamara is the only show in town, he finally gets the volume to be a little bit safer as a start in fantasy football. I'm just hoping that New Orleans can keep this game close so we can maybe get another Alvin Kamara 20-touch game out of it, because that's what we're going to need in a difficult matchup this weekend. His opponent, Miles Sanders, and man, if there was ever a time for mid-season Miles to return, it would be right now. It was great to see him get over 20 touches, though, for the first time since week 12 just last week, but only had 71 total yards to show for it. Now, Sanders, he's faced the Saints 2 times over his career. His average in those 2 games, 15 carries for 105 yards and a touchdown against them. And if we're without Jalen Hurts once again this week, you have to think that 20+ touches is in the cards once again for Miles Sanders. The Saints allowing just under 20 fantasy points per game, with Jalen Hurts being questionable. We also have right tackle Lane Johnson, who is going to be out the remainder of the regular season. Big loss on the offensive line. The safety isn't there for Miles Sanders like maybe it was earlier in the season, but in a game in which Philadelphia could gain an early lead, we're still going to start Miles Sanders. How about the Carolina Panthers and Tampa Bay Buccaneers? I'm actually going to be at this ball game this weekend, so it better be a damn good game to watch. But let's talk about Carolina first, because where the hell did that come from last week? Deonta Foreman and Chuba Hubbard both having over 100 yards rushing and combined for 290 yards rushing against the Detroit Lions just last week. I mean, damn. I mean, that's not normal when it comes to this backfield, but we did just see once again Deonta Foreman go over 20 touches for the 3rd time in the last 4 weeks. And back in week 7, they faced this same Tampa Bay defense, and he ran 15 carries for 118 yards, also added in 27 yards receiving on 2 catches, had 14 fantasy points. But here's the issue. In that same ballgame, Chuba had 9 carries for 63 and a touchdown, added in 10 yards receiving on 2 receptions as well. This backfield is enough to make you want to drink some stiff drinks, if you know what I mean, because on the year, Tampa is only allowing 17.4 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's 7th fewest in the league. But Carolina seems to have no struggles against this defense. What's really hurting right now is the Carolina secondary, which could lead to a negative game script if Tom Brady could ever complete a pass to Mike Evans and maybe put up some points early in ball games. This backfield is impossible to figure out every single week. The Hubbard usage is up and down, not consistent volume. Foreman, the production is up and down, not consistent production. But as of right now, I have to go with the guy that gets the bulk of the volume and 20 plus touches in 3 out of his last 4. D'Onta Foreman's the guy that I edge as a start this weekend. Their opponents, Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White, and playoff Lenny is here. 29 touches last week, most of the season. 10 targets last week, his second highest total of the season. 162 total yards last week, the most in a game this season. The problem is he just can't find the end zone because he doesn't have a touchdown over the last month. Now, White, on the other hand, is getting the opportunity at touchdowns. He's had a receiving touchdown in 2 of his last 4 ball games, but outside of that, the bulk of the volume is going the way of Leonard Fournette. Now, despite social media, Twitter in general, out there telling you that Leonard Fournette is washed, you gotta ignore the crap and watch the games. Right now, they're pretty reliant on Leonard Fournette. Going up against Carolina, they allow just over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Almost everyone and their mother is injured on the Tampa Bay offense and defense, including offensive lineman Donovan Smith. Tristan Wirfs re-aggravated an injury last week. Multiple members on all 3 levels of their defense are hurt. It's a banged up team right now in Tampa Bay. But in games that continue to be must-win for Tampa Bay, and the fact that Tom Brady and Mike Evans can't get on the same page is leading to a lot of passing work going the way of Leonard Fournette, and it's making him a lot safer on the year. As of right now, I'm looking forward to another hefty workload, and we're starting playoff Lenny. How about the Cleveland Browns and Washington Commandos? We'll start off with Cleveland, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt. And as I sat there and I stared at the name of Nick Chubb, I couldn't help but just realize how bad this offense is overall with Deshaun Watson, and how crazy it is to think about that this offense was a lot better with Jacoby Brissett to start the season. Now, Chubb isn't killing your fantasy team right now, but he isn't exactly helping you either. He's had at least 21 touches in back-to-back games, rushing right there in the mid-90s, but hasn't broken 100 yards rushing in a game since week 12 and doesn't have a touchdown over the last month. It's just a plain running game. Have you noticed that? It's a lot of between the tackles running, run up the middle, same old with Nick Chubb. It's boring. It's like this offense has just totally lost all identity with the return of Deshaun Watson. Now they're going against Washington, who allows 17.3 fantasy points per game, 5th fewest in the NFL. Majority of the injuries here are on the defensive side of the football, but Washington is in a must-win scenario. Cleveland really doesn't have anything to play for other than being the spoiler. This isn't an easy matchup for Nick Chubb whatsoever, but as a low-end running back too, I can't afford to sit Nick Chubb this week regardless. Kareem Hunt, kind of an afterthought at this point, not doing anything fantasy related, isn't really an option. Their opponents, Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, and this could be a great opportunity for a big B-Rob game. We've seen him take over this backfield, and he's starting to rack up volume each and every week. This is a must-win game for the Washington Commandos, and Robinson has been running great on the ground here over the last 4 to 6 weeks. He's had at least 20 plus touches now in 3 of his last 4 ball games, 100 plus total yards in 3 of his last 4 ball games, and meanwhile, Antonio Gibson hasn't had more than 12 touches in a game in a month. This is the backfield of Brian Robinson. Now, when it comes to this matchup against the Cleveland Browns, it's a good one. They allow over 24.5 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, 3rd most in the league. Nothing really new when it comes to injuries that are going to affect this running game in a must-win game. I have to think that Ron Rivera really focuses on 2 things this week. It's running the football successfully, and it's playing good defense. The last thing that you want to have happen in a must-win game this late in the season is open yourself up to unforced errors at the quarterback position, which we've seen at times in Washington, and that is not something he wants to deal with. I expect a heavy dose of Brian Robinson, and I'm definitely going to put him into the start column this week. How about the San Francisco 49ers and the Las Vegas Raiders? My Manscaped matchup of the week. We got Christian McCaffrey and Josh Jacobs, two of the best fantasy running backs in the land. And obviously Christmas is over, but that doesn't mean you still can't go spoil yourself with something from manscaped.com. It doesn't matter if it's body wash, shampoo, lip balm, toenail clippers, ear hair trimmers, it doesn't matter. They have you covered at manscaped.com. Just be sure to use referral code headliners at checkout so you can get 20% off and free shipping. And obviously we know we start both of these guys for fantasy football, right? We got CMC, who's the running back 4 overall, has 9 touchdowns in 9 games with San Francisco, who has won 8 straight ball games and is arguably the hottest team in the NFL right now. We know he's still getting over 17 touches a game. The Raiders allow the 7th most points to running backs at 23.1. No other major injuries of concern affecting CMC. And San Francisco still shouldn't be resting their starters probably until next week. So you got to think he goes out there and sees a decent opportunity and maybe finds the end zone. He's for sure a start. And so is Josh Jacobs, who is coming off arguably his worst game of the year and now gets a matchup against San Francisco, which is not ideal. He's had at least 100 total yards or a touchdown, though, in 6 of his last 7 ball games, averaging over 20 touches per contest. But the matchup is rough. Like I said, San Francisco only allows 13.2 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That is the fewest in the NFL. This offensive line in Las Vegas, pretty banged up, but the thing that's really busted and broken for Las Vegas is the play calling sheet of Josh McDaniels, because that crap sucks as of late. With limited expectations in this matchup, we still have to start Josh Jacobs. We've seen the ceiling in difficult matchups this season, and that ceiling is matchup winning, and that's what you're looking for in the championship round, so he'll still remain a start. How about the New York Jets and Seattle Seahawks? We'll start it off with Zonovan Bam Knight. And most importantly here, Mike White is back. And that is good news for the Jets running game. But Knight has kind of burned people here as of late. Been super unreliable and inconsistent. Only has 36 total yards over the last 2 games combined. We're just going to blame that on Zach Wilson, right? That seems like an easy scapegoat as right now. That's all Zach Wilson's fault. Now Mike White is back, and now they're going against Seattle, and they allow the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 25.9 per game. But we know this offensive line is a huge issue for the Jets. The only time Knight has done anything all year was with Mike White under center, but honestly, it wasn't even overly that great. We are super dependent on touchdowns. And in an offense that at times has struggled to score said touchdowns, I can't say that Bam Knight is going to be a safer start. Now you see that he scored 14 points. 1 more point, he's into the start column. Maybe you're looking at somebody for a flex play. I don't mind this matchup, but the inconsistencies as of late and the limited scoring opportunities makes it really hard to start a running back that is going to be touchdown dependent. So as of right now, I have Bam Knight as a sit. His opponent, Kenneth Walker. Finally, a 100-yard rushing game last week for Kenneth Walker, only his 3rd time of the season, but it was also his 4th game of the year in which he saw at least 20 carries, which is great to see. But most importantly, it was the first time that he's had more than 47 yards rushing since week 9 in a ball game. This is a run game that has actually struggled over the last month and a half of the season. But with the injuries to Tyler Lockett and Marquise Goodwin, that only helps the usage of Kenneth Walker. The Jets allow over 18 fantasy points per game, and with those injuries to those wide receivers, I expect Kenneth Walker to be involved once again in the passing game this week. A must-win game for Seattle, and Kenneth Walker has too high of a ceiling to sit. What about Minnesota and Green Bay now? We'll start off with Dalvin Cook. And how much would the Vikings like to be the team to kind of knock the Packers out of playoff contention in Green Bay? That just sounds like a recipe for disaster for a Packers fan. But it wasn't a huge game last week from Dalvin Cook, but he's had touchdowns in 3 of his last 4 games played, averaging right around 18 touches per game, and as a whole is having a lot better year than it has really seemed on the surface. Do you realize he's had just under 1,400 total yards and 10 touchdowns on the year? Not bad at all. Now going against Green Bay, they allow just under 22 fantasy points per contest, 9th most in the league to opposing running backs. We have offensive lineman Garrett Bradbury still questionable to play. That's something to pay attention to, but a great matchup for Dalvin Cook in the cold weather of Green Bay. Still going to be a start here in championship weekend. But what about his opponents in Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon? Now this, like I said, is a must-win game for the Green Bay Packers and a team that's been pretty reliant on its running backs here as of late, but Aaron Jones isn't 100% healthy. Single-digit carries now in 2 of the last 3 games due to missing snaps. Meanwhile, A.J. Dillon has just been an absolute beast. Has touchdowns in 4 straight ball games, 13-plus touches now in 3 straight, getting the goal line carries, and also has 3-plus targets in 4 straight games, kind of in relief of Aaron Jones. Now they're going up against Minnesota. They allow over 21 fantasy points per game, 11th most in the league. Christian Watson, wide receiver, questionable with a hip injury. Offensive tackle, David Bakhtiari, questionable to play as well. And Aaron Jones himself missed half of last week's game with an ankle injury and has been limited in practice. So that's definitely something to pay attention to. I have to expect in a must-win game that we see Aaron Jones on the field. But if for some reason we don't, A.J. Dillon skyrockets up rankings because they're going to have to rely heavily on them. They know that the Minnesota offense can put up points in bunches. We've seen it multiple times all year long. They need to keep the ball away from Minnesota and once again run the ball successfully. If Aaron Jones is a full go by the weekend, I'll start both of these guys. Either one of them in my lineup. If Aaron Jones is out for whatever reason, A.J. Dillon, like I said, definitely going to climb up the rankings. What about the battle of the LA teams? The Rams versus the Chargers, and we'll start off with Cam Akers. And here we have Cam Akers coming off what I would like to call his Will Ferrell moment in the movie Old School, where he basically blacked out, absolutely dominated, woke up and didn't realize what happened, because that's really what happened this past week with him scoring 3 touchdowns in a game. But was that because of the offense and the talent of Cam Akers, the health of Cam Akers? Or was it because the Denver Broncos basically just quit last week? 'Cause that's kind of what it looked like. A lot of people want to come out now and act like, oh, see, we told you Cam Akers was good. They want to ignore the other 14 games of the season that he didn't do crap for you. They want to say, oh, now he's finally healthy. No, that's not it either. This is the new Cam Akers. He's lost a lot of that explosion and is going to be touchdown dependent for the rest of his career, more than likely. On this offense, behind this offensive line, can we rely on touchdowns every single week? Probably not. I mean, has he produced over the last 4 weeks of the season? For sure. But it was against Seattle, Las Vegas, and Green Bay. 3 teams that allow the top 10 points in the NFL to opposing running backs, and a Denver team that quit playing last week. This is not a bad matchup, though. I gotta be honest. Even though the offensive line is a mess, they're going against the Chargers, who allow over 23 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, 8th most in the league. So here we go again. We'll start Cam Akers as another low-end start in an easier matchup. His opponent, Austin Eckler. Of course, we start Austin Eckler, but doesn't it seem like a long time ago since week 3 had ended and a lot of people were calling Austin Eckler a bust? Do you remember that? Now he's the overall running back 1,400 total yards and 16 touchdowns on the year, going against the Rams, who allow just under 20 fantasy points per game. Even though the offensive line isn't great, Justin Herbert really can't find a lot of time in the pocket, and that's benefiting Austin Eckler. Obviously, we know we start him for sure. How about the Pittsburgh Steelers and Baltimore Ravens? Always a fun game to watch late in the season. We'll start it off with Najee Harris, and I really don't feel like I brag on calls very often, but I really feel like I nailed Najee Harris this year. The slow start, picking it up at the end of the season, buying low. It's exactly what's happened with Najee Harris. He's had at least 90 yards rushing or a touchdown now in 7 straight ball games. We just saw a season high in targets as well with 9, and tied a season high with 6 receptions this past week as well. Now, this is a huge rivalry, and Pittsburgh is trying to get back to 500. Baltimore only allows 17.3 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, 6th fewest in all the land, though. But Najee just had 50 total yards and a touchdown against this exact same defense in week 14. No other new major injuries of concern, and even though this is going to be a tough ball game, more than likely Baltimore going to be without Lamar Jackson, could remain a close game where we get our opportunity for more Najee volume and the occasional touchdown. That's what I'm looking for, is that goal line score this week. His opponent, we got J.K. Dobbins, we have Gus Edwards, and I hate this backfield. Just in case you're wondering. You got J.K. Dobbins, who's been the most productive, but yet we've seen his snaps now decrease in 3 straight ball games. Had 120 yards rushing and a touchdown against Pittsburgh in week 14 though. But then when you look over at Gus Edwards, he's had less production, but his snaps have now increased to the point where we have a 50-50 split in this backfield. But there's not a lot of touchdown opportunities to go around here in Baltimore. If they're coming off big plays more times than not. And now they're going against Pittsburgh, who allows 18.8 fantasy points per game. That's 22nd in the league. We mentioned that Lamar Jackson more than likely may not play again, and multiple members of their defense are going to be out as well. This is going to be a headache this week and could totally backfire. I'm just setting the stage for a little bit of disappointment just in case. Starting either one of these guys is going to be a gamble. As of right now, the guy that I feel more comfortable with is going to be J.K. Dobbins because of the big play ability. He will not be highly ranked though. He's not going to be somebody probably inside my top 15. He's going to be a little bit lower to account for some of the risk of a 50-50 split backfield on an offense that doesn't score very much. Full transparency. But that'll then take us to Monday Night Football, a great game to what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about when you look at primetime football. You got the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll start off in Buffalo with Devin Singletary and James Cook. And week 16 actually brought us our first 100-yard rushing game of the year for Devin Singletary. Everybody, round of applause for Devin Singletary there. Had only had more than 75 yards rushing in a game one time since week 6. So last week, a little bit of a big deal, but we still have multiple backs in this backfield that are getting touches on a game-by-game basis. And I expect to see a whole lot of Josh Allen and Joe Burrow throwing the football in this game in what could be kind of a playoff type atmosphere between these two superstars. Now, Cincinnati only allows 17.8 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs and haven't allowed a team to rush for over 100 yards against them since week 13. We do know that offensive lineman center Mitch Moore still questionable to play for Buffalo as well. And being that this is going to be such a touchdown dependency backfield, I have to just say right now, I feel safer passing on both of these guys at this time. For their opponents, you got Joe Mixon and Samaje Perine. And for the most part, the Bengals can't get any run game going when they're trying to incorporate 2 running backs. Now, Joe Mixon, he did just have 23 touches though last week and tied a season high in targets and receptions. Samaje Perine, basically non-existent when Mixon is healthy. Hasn't had more than 26 total yards in a game now in 3 weeks. Going against Buffalo, they allow 18.6 fantasy points per game, 23rd in the league. The loss of offensive tackle La'el Collins for the Bengals is a huge loss though. But if I expect Josh Allen and Joe Burrow to go out there and throw the ball a lot and have those concerns for Buffalo, I have to have those same concerns for the Cincinnati Bengals. That's why you see Joe Mixon with a lower X factor. He's barely a start right there at 15. He's going to be a little bit lower in my rankings, but still a start nonetheless. All right, but there you have it, my starts and sits for the running back position here. Championship week, week 17 of the fantasy football season. In case you're wondering, yes, we will be here for week 18 for all of you who play in horrible leagues that have week 18 championships. We'll be here for you next week, so make sure you don't go anywhere. We just want to make sure to wish you all the best of luck this week, and we're looking for pictures of championship trophies on Twitter. We're looking for success stories down in the comment section. We're looking for a whole lot of celebration from Headliner Nation this weekend, and best of luck to all of you out there in your matchups. Thank you so much for the support over the year. If you can do me a favor, hit the like button. With the season ending, views are going to start going down. The likes will definitely help us out over here on YouTube, but thank you once again for the support. Hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day, a great week, and we'll talk to you later.